It's Tuesday, March 4th. Tonight, how our diets may impact our hearts. Next on North Carolina Now.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Shannon Vickery. Thanks for joining us. Tonight on North Carolina Now, we'll continue our series profiling the UNC campuses as we visit Elizabeth City State University. But we begin with health. To be heart healthy, we should eat less fat and more carbohydrates, right? Well, everything you've ever heard about heart disease and nutrition is about to be challenged. Many experts now say that a low-fat diet is not protecting us, but could be harming us instead. And it's not fat, but sugar that is the real problem. This comes as nutrition labels are changing to point out just how much sugar is hidden in packaged foods. Kelly McHenry begins a three-part series tonight with a close-up look at the changes in conventional wisdom on heart health.
Software engineer Dov Bolka felt like a heart attack just waiting to happen.
All of a sudden my cholesterol shot up to 270. My triglycerides were high off the chart, above 200 or 250.
He was also pre-diabetic, so he did what many people do. He followed the government nutrition guidelines for getting healthy.
And I clamped down very, very hard on fats. As far as carbohydrates are concerned, I ate unlimited carbohydrates because nobody said carbohydrates were bad for you.
He loaded up on whole grain cereals, fresh fruits, and vegetables. Still, he gained 40 pounds. He started taking the statin Lipitor to lower his cholesterol, but it remained high. Then he accompanied his wife to a diet meeting in Durham, and the physician, Dr. Eric Westman, was saying incredible things.
Hello.
He said, don't eat so many carbohydrates, eat fat, saturated fat.
I was shocked. There's no way I would ever be able to give up carbohydrates.
But his wife had already lost 50 pounds in 6 months on the diet. And then Dr. Westman dropped the bombshell. Fat isn't the enemy. It's sugar. So Bolka cut way back on the amount of sugar and simple carbohydrates he was eating. He immediately lost weight, and his glucose numbers plummeted.
My blood sugar numbers went down for the first time in 10 years. And that was a shocker to me. This is working.
That convinced him to start eating Westman's high-fat, low-carb diet. He lost the 40 pounds, and even though he cut his statin dose in half, his good cholesterol doubled, and his bad cholesterol and triglycerides went down. No longer pre-diabetic, Bolka was ecstatic. To him, this was a nutrition revolution.
It is opposite to everything we were told in the last 40 years.
The way to raise your good cholesterol in the blood is by eating fat. In fact, it's saturated fat, the very fat you've been taught not to eat, is the best way to raise your good cholesterol.
The U.S. government told us to eat a certain way. It was all wrong. How can this be?
How can that be? How did saturated fat become such a nutrition villain in the first place? It began after World War II with scientist Ancel Keys. He wasn't a heart doctor, but a starvation expert. He noticed after the war many American businessmen, some of the best fed people on the planet, were dying of heart attacks in increasing numbers. He thought it was fat in the diet. He thought eating a lot of fat caused high cholesterol, which he thought caused heart disease. So he launched a worldwide study measuring how much fat men ate and how many got heart disease. It became known as the 7-country study, which showed a very clear trend between eating fatty foods and getting heart disease.
Key's study was one of the reasons that the American Heart Association eventually recommended this low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet for virtually everyone. But there's a problem. You see, Key's study was not just of 7 countries, but 22 in all. It's just that Key's picked the 7 that fit his hypothesis.
If you pick 7 different ones, you can make the graph show no correlation whatsoever. But the damage was done. Fat, saturated fat, was now bad for you. Food companies produced man-made fats like Crisco and margarine to replace it. In the 70s, for the first time, nutritional guidelines for all Americans were issued. The American Medical Association was outraged, saying one-size-fits-all guidelines are a bad idea. And they weren't even compiled by a health agency, but by a legislative committee led by Senator George McGovern. They called for people to eat less fat and more carbohydrates. Eventually, those guidelines became the food pyramid, which shoved fat into a very tiny space at the top and helped cement our fat phobia. The food plate, released in 2011, doesn't even include fat. Westman says with such little real science, fat got a bad rap.
Well, if saturated fat were put on trial for causing heart disease today, it would be found not guilty.
Westman's high-fat diet landed him on the January 2014 cover of Woman's World magazine. His decades of research show a low-carb, high-fat diet helps patients lose weight, raise their good cholesterol, and lower their bad cholesterol and triglycerides. And the fat phobia, that eating it would give you heart disease, he says, just isn't true.
The fear about eating fat has been dispelled. And so that's at the crux of the fear of eating a low-carb diet is, well, what will we eat? It's fat, and well, we can't eat fat when, yes, you can.
In fact, a study of nearly 348,000 people followed for decades showed how much saturated fat they ate had no impact on whether or not they developed heart disease. Westman does add no diet is perfect. Nutritional needs are different for every person, and you need one that's right for you. But he believes instead of fearing fat, we ought to fear sugar and starch.
So if you have too much sugar and starch, you can gain weight, gain fat weight. You can also gain blood fats.
So it's sugar, not fat, that turns into body fat. And for years, studies have shown added sugar raises your cholesterol. And now, for the first time, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says eating too much sugar by itself can double your risk of dying from heart disease. So, has sugar, not fat, been the real dietary evil all along?
All of a sudden it hit me. I have just stumbled upon a scientific breakthrough.
And tomorrow, Kelly continues her series with an in-depth look at cholesterol and how much of what we thought we knew about it is drastically changing. And for more information on heart disease, visit our website. Meanwhile, the smallest and most affordable university in the UNC system is under new leadership this year, and it has some lofty ideas for the future. In fact, producer Rick Sullivan found out firsthand that Elizabeth City State University has its eyes on the sky, literally.
Founded in 1891, Elizabeth City State was created to train African American teachers. Now, more than 120 years later, producing educators is still fundamental to ECSU's mission, and so is the university's attention to the underserved.
This is a jewel. It is a jewel, and most people don't realize that. For 123 years, Elizabeth City State University has been a key stakeholder in the northeast region of the state.
The university has been the primary source of higher education for more than 60% of the region's current elementary and secondary school teachers. But the school is bringing new energy to more than just the education program, and technologies are at the forefront of these efforts. The pharmaceutical industry is vital to the entire state of North Carolina, and ECSU is heavily invested in the pharmaceutical sciences. Students and faculty conduct research and train in a 52,000 square foot facility with several pathways leading to Bachelor of Science degrees on up to a PhD in pharmacy. Another point of emphasis here at Elizabeth City State is the aviation program, the only one of its kind in North Carolina.
We do it through flight training, so those individuals go out to be professional pilots. We do it in air traffic control. We have aviation management, public administration minors. We also have a technical side to it where we have aviation electronics, avionics.
The training for these programs happens at the regional airport where flight training is hands-on, and back on the main campus where virtual training is hard to distinguish from reality. These students are training for traffic control scenarios that can be as complex as anything they might one day encounter in their chosen industry.
I wouldn't trade it for any flight training elsewhere because our instructors concentrate and they focus on the students at hand.
Just the other week we had actual air traffic controllers come in here and they were working with us and they could understand us and they could pilot for us, and then it's vice versa. I mean, it's the same language and we knew exactly what each other was talking about when we were on the scopes.
One of the most unique and fascinating programs at ECSU is something called CERSER, which stands for Center for Excellence in Remote Sensing Education and Research. Remote sensing involves gathering information about something without actually touching it. Satellites and radar systems are examples of sensing equipment. Dr. Linda Hayden is the director of CERSER, and she has an ambitious mix of faculty, staff, and students available to help her tackle problems from here at North Carolina's coast to as far away as Antarctica.
We do have scientists and mathematicians here. We also have an army of students, both undergraduates and graduate students, who lend their talents.
Recent work includes an investigation into a more than 400-year-old mystery, the whereabouts of the lost colony. Using a map once owned by the explorer John White in the 1580s, the CERSER crew took its equipment to comb through the landscape several miles inland from Roanoke Island, where the settlers had originally landed.
We brought our ground-penetrating radar and our students out there to do a survey, and what we discovered was that there are what we call anomalies in the subsurface terrain, which would indicate that there is something there worth investigating.
CERSER is also involved in research that sheds new light on the melting of polar ice.
As a part of that, I was able to travel to Ilulissat, Greenland, to study the ice sheets in person or in situ. We actually flew around in a twin-otter plane and measured the ice thickness of the Jakobshavn Glacier there in Greenland. While there, we were able to take that data, process it, and create an actual echogram of the ice sheet. If you've been to the doctor and you've had an MRI, you can think of it as an MRI for the ice.
And you can think of CERSER as just one example of the not-so-ordinary possibilities this school creates for its students and its community. Elizabeth City State University has just over 2,000 students, 34 undergraduate degrees, and 4 pathways in graduate studies. It also has some lofty ideas leading to the future.
From day one, I heard the cry, Viking pride, Viking pride, Viking pride. Viking pride means doing ordinary things extraordinarily well.
ECSU's economic impact on the state's northeast region is greater than $300 million. The school is the 3rd largest employer in the 21-county area. The Cedars in the Pine exhibit at the North Carolina Museum of History in Raleigh showcases the heritage of our state's Lebanese population. We recently spoke with a North Carolina State University professor to learn more about the exhibition and the people it profiles.
Joining us now is Dr. Akram Khater. Dr. Khater, welcome back to North Carolina Now.
Thank you so much.
Now, you are the director of the Kerala program for Lebanese American Studies at North Carolina State University. Tell us about the creation of this program and why it was so important to have it in a university setting.
Absolutely. Shortly after 9/11, I think what became apparent is that the narrative about Arab Americans in general, and particularly about Lebanese Americans, really became focused on this idea of terrorism and of basically looking at this community, this ethnic community, as outside the history and the society and the cultural values of the United States. So what we wanted to do is we wanted actually to provide an alternative narrative, a narrative that shows that we have been part of the United States and the fabric of the state of North Carolina for over 130, 140 years. And so this project began as collaboration between Dr. Moise Khairallah, after whom the center is named, who is our major funder, and the North Carolina State University. And the project is primarily, as a pilot project, was to research, document, preserve, and publicize the history of the community in North Carolina.
And of course, you have been working very hard to document that, and you've been working with the North Carolina Museum of History to do that in a special project. Tell us about this project.
Sure thing. So today, we estimate there are about 16,000 Lebanese Americans, or those from Lebanese American descent, and they came in two waves. The first wave is from 1880 to about 1930. The second wave is after 1975 when there was a civil war in Lebanon. And so what we have been doing is we have been going around the state, from New Bern all the way to Asheville, interviewing some of these folks and preserving their history. And the first part of our project was to develop a documentary that in fact aired on UNC TV called Cedars and the Pines. And now we have the museum exhibit at the North Carolina Museum of History by the same title, Cedars and the Pines, that tells that story in a museum exhibit format.
What was it like to go through the research and development of this unique program?
Well, it was very humbling. First of all, the people we met opened their homes and their hearts to us. And as you can very well imagine, these are very intimate stories that they shared with us about great-grandparents or even themselves if they are recent immigrants, and about the challenges they faced, whether it is they arrived at the Jim Crow South in the early 1900s, or they're arriving now with this kind of cloud over their heads as terrorists from the Middle East. But what was really remarkable is to see the uplifting stories about these people, about how they worked hard, brought with them a sense of family, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, a sense of pride in their heritage. And they still carry that. It doesn't matter whether their great-grandparents arrived in 1899 or they arrived just yesterday. There is that sense of element of them that enriches really North Carolina and adds to it. And I think has always carried me forward. That was what provided us with the momentum for the project.
Now, Cedars and the Pines, when you look at this, it's kind of divided into three different sections. Talk about these sections.
Sure. As you very well know, the United States is an immigrant society. There has always been a wave or another of immigration. So we wanted to actually allow our visitors, who themselves more likely than not have some ancestors who immigrated, whether it is Scottish-Irish or Italian or Polish or Jewish or Lebanese, to allow them the opportunity to understand what it means to leave everything behind, to leave family, loved ones, the comfort of knowing the language and the food and the culture, and to arrive here quite often, especially the first wave, without a word of English and without even a prospect of what they were going to do. So we divided it into three parts. The first part is called Journeys. And again, it describes how people travel. How do they make the decision? When do they make the decision? What prompts them to do that? And what is the experience of traveling? First by steerage in a boat across the Atlantic, today, of course, with airplanes, and their travails across these journeys. The second part is called Belonging, and it is basically looking how do immigrants try to integrate into a larger society that quite often sees them as alien, whether it's because they were Catholic and brown in the 1900s, or right now it's because they are Arab, and again, they looked upon suspiciously. But how do they become part of this society, the community? How do they integrate? How do they make themselves, through hard work, through volunteerism, and through their cultural heritage, how do they become part of it? And the last is called Being. Because every immigrant tries to do two things. They try to become American, but also they want to maintain a sense of where they came from. They don't forget that. Whether it is through their food, religion, marriage customs, clothing, or connections back to the homeland, whatever homeland might be, in this case, Lebanon. So in each section, we try to tell that story in different ways. One of them, at one level, it's just text and images that people shared with us. And another is just things you can touch. Silk, you can smell some spices, and you can also do interactive stuff. We have a lot of including, a dance to teach people how to dance the debke, this cultural heritage of Lebanese. So we try to tell it at different levels with these three sections.
And if folks want to find out more about the exhibit, where can they go?
Well, we have a website, and the website is lac.chas.ncsu.edu. That's our website for the project, and they're more than welcome to visit us there, and we have phone numbers if they want to call, or emails, of course, if they want to do that. And we have a newsletter, and they're welcome to subscribe to the newsletter, and we would share it with them every 2 months.
Now, you had mentioned earlier that this was a pilot project. How do you see this evolving? Is it evolving?
Yes. When we started out with this project, Dr. Moise Khairallah and I, as we collaborated, we knew very well that we wanted to test this. We wanted to see, can we go around talking to hundreds of people, collecting their photographs, their home videos, their audio recordings, memorabilia. Can we do all of this and tell a story at the level of North Carolina? Is it manageable? And if that's the case, can we scale it up to the level of the United States? And I'm very happy to say that the experiment has been very successful. I mean, the response to the documentary, whether it's when we screen at UNC TV, or the response already to the museum exhibit, people feel moved by it. They feel that the story means something to them. And again, they don't have to be Lebanese Americans. They could be of any descent. The story strikes a familiarity of people coming here and making it their own. So what will happen beginning next year is that we're hoping to develop this into a center that will look at the same story but at the level of the United States.
Dr. Akram Khater, thank you so very much for stopping by. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
And much continued success to you, sir.
Thank you so much for having me.
Finally, tonight, the great programming continues on Festival 2014. Dr. Mark Hyman joins us in our studios to share his step-by-step process for ending food addiction and reversing diabetes on the 10-day detox diet tonight at 8. That's our show for tonight. For more information on any of the stories we featured, visit our website. Thanks for watching. Have a great evening, everyone.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV.